Hey everybody, just before we get into today's Stare Found Out video, I do want to say that it is not a regular video. It's actually one taken from a new channel that we're working on called Highlight History. If you haven't subscribed to that channel yet, then you probably haven't seen this already. If you have, sorry for the duplication. If you like what you see, we're going to play the whole video today, so you don't have to go over to watch the other half of it or anything like that. If you just want to enjoy this video today, just do that. But if you do like what you see, please do go over to that channel and subscribe. There is a link in the description below. And let's get into it. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born on January 3rd, 1892 in South Africa. His family returned to their native England when he was a small child. Tolkien's parents had died by the time he was 12, so he and his younger brother Hilary were raised by their family's priest, Father Francis Morgan. Ronald, as he was called, remained a devout Catholic his entire life. Tolkien was gifted an exceptional knack for linguistics. While attending King Edward's School in Birmingham, he was adept at Latin and Greek and later learned Anglo-Saxon and Finnish. He also developed his own languages, complete with grammar rules and guidelines for usage. During his studies, he became enchanted with the old stories of ancient races, with their awesome gods and their fated heroes on epic adventures. When he was in school, the 16-year-old Tolkien met a 19-year-old young woman named Edith Bratt. Biographer Humphrey Carpenter noted that during their courtship, Edith and Ronald took to frequenting Birmingham tea shops, especially one which had a balcony overlooking the pavement. There, they would sit and throw sugar lumps into the hats of passers-by, moving to the next table when the sugar bowl was empty. With two people of their personalities and in their position, romance was bound to flourish. Both were orphans in need of affection, and they found that they could give it to each other. During the summer of 1909, they decided that they were in love. Unfortunately, as a result of the relationship, his grades started to suffer and he didn't get a hoped-for scholarship to Oxford University. Father Francis stepped in and forbade Ronald from seeing or even writing to Edith until he was 21 years old, which was 3 long years away. Tolkien later wrote in a letter to his son in 1941 explaining the situation, "I had to choose between disobeying and grieving or deceiving a guardian who had been a father to me more than most fathers and dropping the love affair until I was 21. I don't regret my decision, though it was very hard on my lover, but it was not my fault. She was completely free and under no vow to me, and I should have had no just complaint, except according to the unreal romantic code, if she got married to someone else. For very near 3 years, I did not see or write to my lover. It was extremely hard, especially at first. The effects were not wholly good. I fell back into folly and slackness and misspent a good deal of my first year at college." Unfortunately for Tolkien, he found after writing a letter to her on the evening of his 21st birthday, professing his undying love and asking for her hand in marriage, that she had become engaged in the interim, having assumed he would not come back to her after so long. Fortunately, though, while Tolkien at this point in his life didn't have the best prospects, she almost immediately chose to break off her engagement with one George Field, much to George's chagrin, and instead marry Tolkien. His lady love ultimately became the source of Lúthien, as he explained after her death. "I never called Edith Lúthien, but she was the source of the story that in time became the chief part of the Silmarillion. It was first conceived in a small woodland glade filled with hemlocks at Roos in Yorkshire, where I was for a brief time in command of an outpost of the Humber garrison in 1917, and she was able to live with me for a while. In those days, her hair was raven, her skin clear, her eyes brighter than you have seen them, and she could sing and dance. But the story had gone crooked, and I am left, and I cannot plead before the inexorable Mandos." He served in the army during World War I and suffered the horror of losing all but one of his close friends on the battlefield, as well as frequently suffering from various illnesses. It was during this time that he began writing some of the stories that would serve as the backbone of his future works and ultimately more directly resulted in the Silmarillion. This all brings us to 1930, when Tolkien jotted these words in the margin of a test paper: "In a hole in the ground lived a hobbit." This grew into a simple, good triumphing over evil fairy tale that he would tell to his kids. Over the next few years, his friends, including C.S. Lewis, read the manuscript of The Hobbit and gave it rave reviews. It was published and hugely successful, so everyone was all about Tolkien serving up a sequel. So it was that Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings over a period of many years. It was nothing like his first book, neither in tone nor dimension. This was no cut-and-dry adventure story. The Lord of the Rings was an epic with spiritual and moral undertones, not a book to read to little tykes in blanket sleepers. The publishers were worried about its commercial viability and released it in 3 parts in 1954 to 1955, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. They also refused to pay Tolkien an advance until the books turned a profit. But, well, they needn't have worried. In the mid-1960s, Tolkien reached an almost unimaginable level of fame for a living British author when The Lord of the Rings was released as a paperback in the United States. Tolkien was flattered by the attention, but a bit put off by the idea that the latest fad was tripping on acid and reading his book. He also could have done without the phone calls in the middle of the night from California asking if Balrogs had wings. So he and Edith, they changed their phone number and moved to a seaside community where many other wealthy retirees flocked. No one was more surprised than Tolkien at the amount of money his books raked in. Unfortunately for the happy couple, on November 29, 1971, Edith died at the age of 82. Said Tolkien's grandson, Simon Tolkien, "My grandmother died 2 years before my grandfather, and he came back to live in Oxford. Merton College gave him rooms just off the high street. I went there frequently, and he'd take me to lunch in the Eastgate Hotel. Those lunches were rather wonderful for a 12-year-old boy spending time with his grandfather, but sometimes he seemed sad. There was one visit when he told me how much he missed my grandmother. It must have been very strange for him, being alone after they had been married for more than 50 years. Just shy of 2 years after the death of his beloved, j.r.r. Tolkien died owing to complications from an ulcer and an infection on September 2, 1973, and he was buried next to Edith. On their shared tombstone, the engraving reads, Edith Mary Tolkien Lúthien, 1889 to 1971. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien Baron, 1892 to 1973. And now for some bonus facts. Nicolas Cage was originally offered the part of Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. Cage stated in an interview that he turned down the offer due to the around 3-year time commitment. Cage also stated in the same interview that he was offered the role of Neo in The Matrix, but turned that one down as well for the same reason. Both are great movies, but they both shot for great quantities of time. I mean, years. Australia was The Matrix and New Zealand was The Lord of the Rings. I had family obligations, so I'm glad I stayed and had those experiences with my family. Interestingly, in Lord of the Rings, the role of Aragorn was eventually given to Stuart Townsend, who had been in various movies, including Aeon Flux and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Townsend was ultimately fired, however. In Townsend's own words, I was there rehearsing and training for 2 months, then was fired the day before filming began. After that, I was told they wouldn't pay me because I was in breach of contract due to not having worked long enough. I had been having a rough time with them, so I was almost relieved to be leaving until they told me I wouldn't be paid. I have no good feelings for those people in charge, I really don't. The director wanted me and then apparently thought better of it because he really wanted someone 20 years older than me and completely different. Russell Crowe also turned down the role of Aragorn, and it was finally given to Viggo Mortensen after one of the producers, Mark Rudensky, saw a replay with Mortensen in it. Mortensen was also initially hesitant to take the role because of the time commitment involved, but his son, who is a huge fan of the books, convinced him to take the part. Speaking of Mortensen, he occasionally went surfing in his free time while filming Lord of the Rings. At one point, he bruised one side of his face badly enough that the makeup crew couldn't hide it. Rather than stop filming, Peter Jackson simply didn't film that side of Aragorn's face throughout the scene. The scene in question was in the Mines of Moria when the Fellowship comes across the tomb of Balin. Mortensen also broke 2 toes while filming the scene where he kicks the helmet by the pyre, thinking Merry and Pippin were dead. Because of his realistic cry of anguish after kicking the helmet and breaking his toes, Peter Jackson chose that take to include in the movie. And now for another bonus fact. When Elrond states in the Fellowship of the Ring film,
"The ring was made in the fires of Mount Doom. Only there can it be unmade. It must be taken deep into Mordor and cast back into the fiery chasm from whence it came."
some claim this isn't correct speech. Why? Mostly because they have too much time on their hands, but also because whence actually means from where or from what place. So what he said was, it must be taken deep into Mordor and cast back into the fiery chasm from where it came. Thus, the argument is that including a preceding from is redundant. This is very similar to hence, which, if used to refer to time or location, has an implied from this place or from this time. For example, I shall go hence, meaning I shall go from here. However, why grammar Nazis the world over should shut up about this, and just in general if we're being honest, is that the from whence faux pas has been around since the early 13th century. In fact, there are numerous examples of from whence in works by Shakespeare, Defoe, Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, and even several in the King James Bible. Thus, it could be argued that this isn't technically incorrect at all given the long-standing precedents here, just a little redundant. But how else are grammar Nazis supposed to bolster their sense of self-importance silence and fill that empty void inside themselves if they aren't allowed to nitpick things that any real linguist from our experience wouldn't even bat an eye at. And now for another bonus fact. Andy Serkis was originally offered a 3-week stint doing the voiceover work in New Zealand for the role of Gollum. The filmmakers hadn't originally planned on having anyone play Gollum beyond just someone do the voice. However, Serkis chose to act out the part while doing the voice work during scenes. Jackson was so impressed he hired him to play the part full-time. Gollum's movements, facial expressions, and mannerisms were then modeled by the animators after Serkis' performances in the scenes. And now for another bonus fact. John Rhys-Davies originally auditioned for the part of Lord Denethor, but was given the part of Gimli the Dwarf, despite Rhys-Davies being 6 feet 1 inch tall. Indeed, he is the tallest member of the Fellowship. Rhys-Davies also did the voice of Treebeard. And now for another bonus fact. Ever wonder what Arwen is saying when she defeats the Ringwraiths after crossing the river at the ford of Brunnen? Well, the words she speaks in that scene translate thus. Waters of the Hithaglir, hear the word of power. Rush, waters of the Brunnen, against the Ringwraiths. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. Like I said at the top, this is a video taken from our new channel, Highlight History. It's sort of a Today in History thing. If you like what you saw today, please do click the link in the description below, go over to that channel and subscribe for more. And as always, I'll see you next time.